I'd like to welcome all of you to the 9th Busan International Port Conference. I am KN announcer Hee Jung. I'll be your MC today. Busan Port Authority has hosted the Busan International Port Conference every November starting in 2013. And this year marks its 9th anniversary. It will celebrate its 10th anniversary. It is said that in a decade, a whole landscape would be completely transformed. So it has written a history over the last 9 years. So I am looking forward to the 10th BIPC next year, and I have such an expectation for today's program as well as tomorrow's program. We have various special lectures as well as working sessions today and tomorrow. We will look into global maritime container shipping trends and forecast disruption to shipping logistics caused by the pandemic and addressing future challenges as well as advantages to e-commerce and the future of the ports. As in last year, we are holding this conference in a hybrid format. Due to the pandemic, we have invited only a small number of people in person. I would like to ask for your understanding. Instead, many participants are joining us virtually. Let us meet the online attendees on the screen. Can you see them? So why don't we wave at each other? Thank you very much. I hope we can all meet in person next year. The theme of today's program is humanity and people. I hope that it will be a time to restore what we have lost as the overarching theme of the conference. To get started, let us watch a video we prepared for you. Thank you very much. The title of the video is Looking Forward to the Day When We Hold Hands Together Again. Well, though we have been under the travel restrictions, but today we've seen the beautiful sceneries of those beautiful ports. So I truly hope that we'll be able to meet each other in person and we can hold the hands of the persons next to us. Let me introduce today's VIPs. Please welcome them with a big hand. And those whose name is called. And please turn around and look at the camera so that those who are joining us online and offline can see you clearly. Please turn around and say hello. We are joined by Jung-seok Kang, President of Busan Port Authority. We are also joined by Yong-seok Kang, the head of the Busan Regional Oceans and Fisheries Agency, and Young Soo-jang, President of Bukyung University, is joining us today. We are also joined by Ino Park, who is the co-chair of the Busan Port Development Commission. We are also joined by Youngnan Shin, Commissioner of the Busan Port Authority Commission. We are also joined by Kyu-seok Kwak, the Chairman of the Busan Port Authority Commission. We are joined by Her Excellency Ambassador Maria Castillo Fernandez of Embassy of European Union to the Republic of Korea. We are joined by President Tae-woong Kim of KMI. We are joined by Sung Seo. We are joined by Mr. Christophe Honeycoat from the U.S. Embassy to Korea. We are joined by Sun Young-chung of Fisheries Development Institute. We are joined by Young Kim, President of Fisheries and Oceans Development Institute. We are joined by Dr. Daniel Lee, Research Scientist of International Vaccine Institute. We are joined by Mr. Tae-woong Park, Chairman of Board of Hanbit Media. We are joined by Young-do Kim, the Chairman of the Association of Busan Port Development. We are joined by Mr. Young-sik Hwang, the Chairman of Busan Maritime Association. And we are joined by Chung-yeon Lee of the Busan Logistics Development Association. We are joined by President Jae-jun Choi. We are joined by Honorable Yang Joo-chen Jerik of Mongolian Embassy to Korea. We are also joined by Mr. Buna Lori of the European EU Embassy to Korea. We are joined by President Suk-sun Choi of BNCT. We are joined by President Kyu-kyung Kim of Hanjin Shipping. So we are joined by many other important guests, but due to time constraints, so we do not have time to introduce each and every one of the VIPs. But thank you very much for joining us today. Now I'd like to invite President Jung-seok Kang of Busan Port Authority to start today's program. Please welcome him with a big hand. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Jun-seok Kang, President of Busan Port Authority. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude and welcome to Her Excellency Ambassador Maria Castillo Fernandez of Embassy of the European Union to the Republic of Korea, Mr. Tae-woong Park, Chairman of Board of Hanbit Media, Dr. Daniel Lee, Research Scientist of International Vaccine Institute, as well as all the distinguished guests and participants who are joining us in person and virtually. In this difficult time of pandemic, I feel such a great responsibility to lead Busan Port, which is the second largest transshipment port and the seventh largest container port in the world. I will be fully committed to supporting the development of Busan Port into a global hub port. The Busan International Port Conference, inaugurated in 2013, has evolved into the only port-dedicated international conference, and this year marked its 9th anniversary. The previous 4 editions have successfully analyzed the development in the global port and logistics market and focusing on tackling the global issues exposed by COVID-19, as well as the fourth industrial revolution. And as you have seen and experienced, uncertainties regarding the future has been even more serious with the COVID-19. And we have witnessed nationalism, bipolarization, and global disruption in the logistics and port sector because of the COVID-19 as well. The spread of COVID-19 has forced us to keep distance from each other. In this rather unfamiliar environment, even logistics have lost its way. However, with the speedy vaccination and the development of the oral treatment of COVID-19, the war against the virus has come to an end. Now is the time for the port and logistics industry to consider what we are going to do in the future and the direction we are going to pursue. At this 9th Busan International Port Conference, we'd like to consider the lost values we have lost during the COVID-19. And we also want to have a better understanding as to the disruption caused by COVID-19 in the logistics sector and consider what we are going to do and what we have to do to ensure the successful future of the port industry. The Korea has introduced a phased normalization since the outbreak of COVID-19, and we will embark on a journey to restore the values we have long lost during the pandemic. And the logistics will serve as the bridge to connect the world. And the Busan Port Authority will fully understand the changes and the development in the global port and logistics industry through BIPC and will find ways to create a better opportunities for us all. I hope that we will be able to prepare ourselves for the future and the future opportunities. Once again, I'd like to welcome all of you to the conference. Thank you. Thank you, President, for your warm welcome. I'd like to have a brief conversation with the President. The President took office on September 30th, so I think this conference might be even more meaningful. And from the venue for BIPC, Busan Port International Passenger Terminal, you can see Busan Port at a glance. Well, here you can feel the change of Busan Port. What is the image of Busan Port in your mind? The Busan Port International Passenger Terminal is located in the North Port. As you know, the North Port has long been designated as a security area of limit to general citizens. However, with the redevelopment project, which is underway, we will be able to turn this North Port back to the citizens. The redevelopment project is underway right next to this building. The successful redevelopment project will turn this port area into the world's best waterfront area. And the phase 1 of this redevelopment project will be completed by next year. Then this will become much more accessible and available to the general citizens of Busan. And the year after that, phase 2 of a redevelopment project will be initiated. One thing I'd like to ask you to note is that this is the venue for 2030 Expo. If we successfully attract the Expo, this will be the venue for the 2030 Expo. If that comes true, then the North Port in Busan will be the hub of business, ocean tourism, and finance as one of the best brands in the world. This is my vision for the Busan port in the future. I'd like to ask for your support and a keen interest. Thank you very much for sharing such a great vision with us. Then what is the direction of development for Busan port as a whole? You know all too well about Busan New Port. Many of you must have paid a visit to the new port development site. And as you know, Busan Port is the second largest transshipment port and the seventh largest container port in the world. Last year, the traffic volume of Busan Port amounted to 22 million TEUs. Do you know how much is that? One container is 6 meters long. If you put them in a law, then you can travel around the world 3.5 times. Isn't it really amazing? The Korean government and Busan Port Authority are making dedicated effort to grow Busan Port into a global logistics hub through various policy efforts. First of all, in order to accommodate 20,000 tons of vessels, we will build a new terminal, and we will turn this port into a world-class smart port by adopting various technologies such as IoT. And the second direction is to make it more eco-friendly. As you know, the environment and the environmental issues have become such an important topic in the world. By 2025, our goal is to reduce the particulate matter emission by Busan Port by 70%. The measures we are adopting include AMP installation and slow steaming. But 95% of the particulate matter or emissions generated by Busan Port are actually attributable to vessels, and 9% is from port operation. That is why we are considering various ways to make an improvement as to this matter. So slow steaming might be one of the ways, and we are pursuing the transition into LNG for fuels. And the third direction we want to pursue is to create and facilitate a new port district port. We have such a massive hinterland. The hinterland served a very limited purpose, such as loading and offloading. But this new district port will accommodate various industries and manufacturing facilities, including the chemical, automotive, and so on. And another point I'd like to highlight here is the possibility of a new airport. If we have a Kadok new airport, which will be located within 5-kilometer radius from the new port, and I believe this will be realized with the passage of the law next year. And if we are to have this new airport in Kadok Island, we will be able to generate a massive synergy since we have the airborne transportation as well as the seaborne transportation. And this will lead to the creation of a new logistics ecosystem. So another part of the vision is to build the globally competitive logistics hub. Thank you for sharing us your vision for Busan and Busan Port. And next year we'll celebrate the 10th anniversary of BIPC. So would you please share with us your vision for the next 10 years? As you mentioned, BIPC, which was first started in 2013, will celebrate its 10th anniversary next year. Procedurally, well, the conference was not really smooth or substantial. However, well, now it is not an ordinary event. It has provided the latest trends and knowledge to the shipping and port professionals and has contributed to raising awareness of the role and importance of the port to the general public. So, as a global brand representing Busan Port, Busan Port Authority, and the Korea's shipping and port logistics, we will redouble our efforts to establish ourselves in this conference as a global platform for sharing knowledge on port and logistics. I'd like to ask for your forward participation and keen interest in this regard. Busan International Port Conference, I'm looking forward to the future BIPC. Future of BIPC, I'd like to ask for your continued efforts in this regard. Thank you, President.
This is the 9th BIPC, the Busan International Ports Conference. We'll now move into our special sessions. But before we go into the presentations of the special session, we have two other very meaningful sessions prepared for you today. First of all, we have a story submission contest, the results of which we would like to share with you. We asked people to submit their stories for the last 8 years of the BIPC, and in fact, many people have participated in this story submission contest, and we'd like to show 3 videos to you today. Lee Se-jin, Jung Sang-hoon, and Tatiana. We'd like to show these 3 videos to you now. Hello, my name is Lee Se-jin. I work at the BPA. The BIPC and I have a very strong relationship. 7 years ago, I participated in the second BIPC, where I worked together with Busan, Barcelona, Drury, and Alpha. Various experts from all of these different groups came together to discuss the future of marine shipping. And that led me to dream big about working at a port one day, which is how I became to work at this BPI. I am very much pleased to be part of this event, and I'd like to extend my congratulations to you on this BIPC, and I hope that you will have continued future in the years to come. Hello. My name is Jung Sang-hoon. I'm from the Korea Marine Shipping Association. I first came across BIPC in 2017. I remember a lecture that I heard at the time. It was given by Professor Marcel. I remember that the professor was quite humorous in the presentation, and in interaction with the audience was quite memorable. There were many people in the audience who were leaning in and trying not to miss any word. And in listening to that lecture, I thought to myself that one day I might be able to bring about so much resonance to the audiences that I meet. Through BIPC, I was able to understand better the role of ports and the role of marine shipping in particular. I know that this is the 9th BIPC, and I hope that ports and marine shipping can work together and find an opportunity out of this current crisis. Hello, my name is Tatiana. I'm an expat living here in Busan for the last 5 years, and I have been participating in the BIPC for the last 3 years. I've learned more about logistics, ports, and marine shipping in particular. I was able to hear more about very useful information about the current industry trends in the future. At the BIPC, I was able to learn about future challenges and various experts' proposals and lectures, their opinions regarding the current status of the industry in the future. Through BIPC, I was able to come to access to these interesting lectures and many interesting people as well. I am very much excited for this next BIPC, and I sincerely give you my cheers and encouragement. Thank you very much to all of our 3 story submission contestant participants. Listening to all these stories, I was able to see that the BIPC played a bridge and played a role in their different lives. I hope that the BIPC will continue to play a bridge going forward. Thank you very much. The BPA has a lot in store for you today at this BIPC. In fact, we have a performer who is set to give you a beautiful performance, Danny Koo, who is active in the social media and on TV. Violinist Danny Gu is well known to his audiences, and we'd like to hear more from this very interactive violinist who's going to give his presentation and his performance to you.
여러분 안녕하세요. 마이너스 데니고입니다. 반갑습니다.
Hello, my name is Danny Koo. It is a
And
pleasure
for
to
all
meet
of
you.
our international folks, hi, my name is Danny, and I'm delighted to be here with you guys today. 제가 듣기로는 이 컨퍼런스가
that this
되게
conference, the
희망적인
BIPC,
컨퍼런스라고 들었어요.
is
그래서
a very
첫 번째
hopeful,
곡으로
very uplifting
락마누나
conference, which is why
보컬리즈라는
I
곡을
did
했는데요.
Vocalise
그게
by
바로 그런
Rachmaninoff
곡인 것 같습니다. 좀
for my first
아픈 속
performance, and I think
안에서
that in this
조금
place of
희망의
sorrow, you
불빛이
can
살짝
still
보이지
see a
않나
ray
이렇게
of
생각이
hope.
듭니다. 이제 다음
And I hope
곡으로는
that you felt
이제
that through the
크라이슬러가
Rachmaninoff piece.
작곡한
Next is a
마르치
piece
비에닛을
composed by
할 건데요.
Chrysler, the March
그거는 바로
Viennese.
그런 의미예요.
And
이
this
컨퍼런스
is
시작할 때 우리
also
힘차게
something that you might find at the beginning of any conference, such as this one, a big raucous start to the conference. And I would like to play this piece for you. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
네, 멋진 공연을 보여주신 바이올리니스트 데니고에게 다시 한번 여러분 뜨거운 박수 부탁드립니다.
With his wonderful performance, let's give him another big round of
네,
applause.
아시겠지만 데니고
As you
바이올리니스트가 굉장히 팬덤이
Danny Koo
두텁습니다.
has a very strong fan
채팅창이
base.
데니고의 등장과 동시에
And as soon
아주
as he came to
바빠졌는데요.
the stage,
먼길
I
자리에
can see
주셔서
that our chat
멋진
window
공연
has been lighting
보여주시면
up.
다시 한번
Thank you very much to
감사드립니다.
Danny for his
자, 이제
wonderful
그럼
concert and his performance. We'd now like to move into the special session. We have a speaker who has come straight from Seoul to be with us today, Maria Castillo Fernandez, Ambassador, the Embassy of the European Union to the Republic of Korea, who is going to talk about post-pandemic, our way forward, finding our path after the pandemic. Please give Ms. Maria Fernandez a big round of applause.
안녕하세요 to all of you, and it's very difficult to come after Danny Koo, so and to maintain your attention. I hope I can manage somehow. It's a great pleasure. Thank you to Chairman Kang Jun-suk. Congratulations again on his new appointment, and thank you for your invitation to the European Union to be part of this 9th conference. Looking forward to the 10th, which is always a big milestone. It is, for me, the first conference since I came a year ago to Korea that I see so many people in a room. This is part of the new normal with Corona in Korea. Certainly, we hope to see much more of this, and I'm very happy we can start in Busan, in this beautiful city with a view to the sea and a very active port, as we have heard. With all of this, I am also grateful that you managed to include some more horizontal perspective in your technical discussions that you are going to start tomorrow. I'll try to present a little bit two overriding problems that we are all facing. I am sure this will be part as a cross-cutting issue throughout all your discussions today and tomorrow. Bringing a bit of multilateral global perspective, not only European. One, we all know we have two big challenges on our table, apart from many others, but global challenges that certainly condition the work of every one of us as individuals, as professionals, as business people, as institutions. One is how we can end the pandemic, and how we, at the same time, fight climate change. We all have an ear in Glasgow, in what is happening there, in what our leaders from all over the world are pledging, of all these ambitions becoming actions. But that makes us think that for all these very big global challenges that we are having, there is only one solution, and that solution is a multilateral one. It's through multilateral cooperation that we would manage to come over from this crisis. And many people are putting, on doubt multilateralism, this set of rules and methods that international actors abide to because they are equally applied to everyone. And I must say that we have to prove them wrong, because as we saw in Glasgow these last days, and we will see it more, global cooperation has been tried to weaken, but I think we are becoming much more stronger. Dear friends, we are really at a moment of big transformation in our societies, in our economies. And this big transformation is certainly very ambitious, but it's doable if we can do it together. If every one of us puts its efforts into this, it's not going to be a government issue only, it's not going to be institutions, it's not going to be business, it's going to be all of us as individuals covering all our sectors and trying to fight together, and that is certainly my first message to you. Whatever you're going to do from now on, it has to be done in partnership, it has to be done together in collaboration, and not in competition. And therefore, I'm very happy, that also ports reach out to these partnerships and collaboration, and this conference is certainly one example. Let us start with the vaccine, the pandemic. I know that certainly Daniel Lee will follow up with a more concrete discussion on the challenge of COVID. But I just want to tell you perhaps one or two things that you don't know. I mean, at the European Union, we have chosen to go to multilateralism and cooperation instead of competition and nationalism, trying to fight the pandemic and on our vaccination strategies. Now we have at least 75% of the population in Europe fully vaccinated, 80% with one dose. But this means that we are open. And that, Europe, if some of you have been traveling to Europe, and I know Chairman Khan will soon be going to Barcelona and he's been also in Rotterdam, Europe is open. And we have more or less a normal life back. And it will be very difficult to close it again, I tell you. Citizens, business don't want to go back. So I hope to see Asia soon open as well. Asia is lagging in the behind, and certainly for me, vaccination is the key. Vaccination, vaccination, vaccination. We have provided 1 billion doses, not only for European citizens, but 1 billion doses for more than 150 countries around the world. So 50% of our production has gone abroad. To Korea, perhaps the vaccine that most of you have is a European one. 70% of the vaccines that have been delivered in Korea are Europeans, come from Europe. And perhaps that you didn't know. But it's not enough. I mean, we need to work with many other countries to try to shorten that vaccine gap that we all know is there. We need to try to invest on treatments, and therefore the work of IVI there is very important. Work also with WHO very closely. This needs a multilateral cooperation effort. And certainly through COVAX facility, try to reach those countries who really need this. And don't forget the digital certificates. You have your certificates that you're vaccinated in your phones. If you go to Europe, you will need them, and perhaps soon also here to go to bars and restaurants. We need to really mutually recognize these certificates because you are using the same vaccines as we are using. So why don't we recognize them, both of us, mutually? So that is also part of the trust and multilateral cooperation. Post-pandemic in the EU, as I said, requires a fundamental transformation of our economies, and that will be a transition which certainly be green, digital, and sustainable. And it will affect everyone, from the city of Busan to institutions, port authorities, and the whole shipping and maritime industry equally as well. And I know that in the next sessions tomorrow, you are going to look at how we are going to go through the decarbonization of the maritime industry. And each of you have to put the efforts on this. In Europe, we have the Green Deal, like you have the Korean deal here, which is more or less the overall framework to try to reach out to those very ambitious targets that we have set, 55% reduction of emissions for 2050, and to become, at that time, the first climate neutral continent. But I know Korea has also said it's a very ambitious goal for the authority, Port Authority. We're very happy to hear, Chairman, also a very ambitious goals as well. We have a digital deal as well. Digitalization of every part of the society is also very important, and there, Korea, you are taking the lead. You are already very far away in digital and innovation. So there is certainly a net zero goal is certainly necessary. You need for that a lot of innovation as well. You have to be careful also and take account for those sectors who are suffering the most with this transformation, and that's why we have this SURE program to ensure you know, that unemployment is not increased, that social benefits also go to sectors which are going to suffer the most. And you cannot do anything without a big finance program behind it. And we are sure that with this transformation, you need a lot of investment, public and private, but also public, and it's coming. 1 trillion euros for 7 years is what Europe is putting on the table in our recovery instrument, and this is certainly for green and digital transitions. Very ambitious goals on climate, as I say, to build back better, 55% cut of emissions for 2030, 32% of renewables, and I know there Korea is only 6% of renewables, so there is a lot of work that has to be done also here, and improving a lot in energy efficiency. We can do so much in just improving our way of using the energy that will help us to reach out these goals. But that means, and that's what I wanted to tell you, that there is going to be, from now on, and we heard that in Glasgow, we are going from ambitious to actions, real actions. So there's going to be come a lot of legislation in Europe, and I imagine also in other parts of the world, to try and put these ambitious goals into concrete action to be able to achieve them. This is certainly what will be announced for the transport sector very soon. At the end of November, we will come with concrete legislation that will cover transport sector, including the maritime sector for Europe. What do we mean, perhaps green in maritime? Certainly, the whole decarbonization and modernization in transport and mobility systems, low emission vehicles that we need to decarbonize, waterborne transportations, zero pollution to waters, so ocean governance, very important. That will help to benefit the sea basins, the coastal areas, the ports, but also to use more our inland waters. You know, in Europe we have very big rivers where we transport a lot of goods with them. We are going to use them more and try to change the transport route from roads to inland waters. Of course, very important, the Europe emission trading system, we will be extending it to the shipbuilding sector and the maritime sector, and also deploying what is most important, alternative fuel infrastructures, alternative fuel, the Fuel EU Maritime, which will impact many of you, certainly is going to be the future. And for that, I know you need a lot of more innovation and technology. We are not yet there. And of course, ports and ships, the shipbuilding industry, the ports will have to change also their infrastructure as well. But all of that will come with digitalization, automatization of ports more than ever. That certainly will help, you know, the industry to lower costs, lower times, which is so necessary in the world of today. Let me give you also a word of why Europe is trying to do so many things now in this part of the region. We call it our Indo-Pacific strategy, and it contains also part of a dimension of connectivity and a dimension of transport and maritime. We are the top investor in Asia Pacific. We are the top investor in Korea, but also in many other countries. Our economies are really interconnected. We are the biggest trading partner in most of the Indo-Pacific countries, and together Europe and Asia hold over 70% of the global trade and 60% of investment flows. So Asia matters for Europe, the Indo-Pacific matters a lot for Europe. And what this strategy means is mainly a sort of recommitment, our affirmation that we are here and we are here to stay, that we want to strengthen and build in more partnerships, and that despite intense competition, geopolitical competition that has increased tensions, and we see the disruptions of supply chain, which I am sure you feel it in the first line here. There is also technological competition, security and political tensions that are created because of these geopolitical strategic tensions. But we want, on the other hand, to be here to maintain what we call a free and open Indo-Pacific for all, building strong partnerships based on rule-based international order. We need rules more than ever. Ports, shipping industry, transport, trade needs clear rules and frameworks, a level playing field, very important, and an open and fair environment. And certainly from there also freedom of navigation and connectivity. Our strategy is not directed to any country. It's every country in the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific goes from the east coast of Africa to the Pacific Islands. It's a bit more than Asia. And these are the areas where we want to engage with partners that, share values and interests in this region, create this partnership on sustainable and inclusive prosperity, the green transition, the ocean governance, certainly very important for your industry. That means, and Chairman Khan is an expert on fisheries management and control systems. Certainly that is an area where we want to see more partnerships, but also means maritime security. We know the tensions in the area, not only in the South China Sea. I've been posted before in Malaysia, and I know how important that area for a whole trade value chain is for all of us. We need to ensure freedom of navigation and certain secure lines of communication for all. Very important that for all of this you need certainly financial incentive and more innovation, because alone, nor you can make it, nor we can make it either. This is what Europe does in Korea. Our leaders just met last weekend in Rome in the margins of the COP20, where G20, sorry, where leaders of the 20 most developed economies met. But certainly we are, as I said, the largest investor, Korea's third trading partner. Our bilateral trade in goods have increased 46% in the last 10 years when we have our new FTA, a free trade agreement, and that has reached 19 billion euros in 2020. This is a lot, and certainly a big bank of that trade comes through Busan and the port here, which therefore is very important, and that's why I always like to engage with the port and with Busan city in all these issues. But our relation is much more. It's about climate opportunities, it's about digital partnerships, it's also about transport partnerships, and we are soon going to launch the first transport dialogue, coming also to Busan, because you are part of this connectivity and transport dimension of our relations. But this is also about increasing exchanges of research and innovation, increasing exchanges of people. People to people are very important for us, and certainly security as well in this part of the world. Let me just conclude with some reflections. Friends, we are at a moment of history which is very important, and we should be proud to be able to contribute to it in whatever world or work we are doing. We are all responsible for this big transformation, as I said. And Europe and us here, my team, we are trying to do whatever it takes to be the first climate neutral continent, but also to bring other partners like Korea to these global efforts. We need real actions during this decade. This is important. It's not, we don't have a plan B for this. This is solely this way we are all going. Otherwise, you just will fall down. You will be out of the market. You will be out of the transformation the society needs, of the economy. So we need all of us to be together to set up a framework of rules that are international based, that they're applicable for all, that lay out a level playing field, and we need to do it together. This cost is big, I know, but the cost of not action is even bigger, certainly. Sustainability is a source of growth, and it's a source of jobs. It doesn't mean that jobs are going to go away. On the contrary, there will be new jobs. You will need new skills for your people, for your technical people. And certainly, we will be there with Korea, supporting this clean transition for all. I want to recall, to end, some words that Chairman Khan just said. We need to return ports to the citizens. We need to involve cities and citizens in all this big transformation. For me, ports connect people. I am a person very Mediterranean. I come from Spain, and I need the sea. And I know how important are cities that are near the sea. They are different to the cities that are inland. And you provide something, a more open mind. Perhaps it's the sea that opens your mind every morning when you look out of the windows, but it certainly gives you, like the music that Danny has just performed for us, a just of tranquility. And certainly we need that. We need your inspiration. We need the inspiration that seas and ports. We need the ports to connect us with the sea, to the people. And they are the center, they can be the center of building future partnerships between nations and between regions. It's certainly a key important dimension of the work of what we do in Korea as European Union, and certainly it will be at least in the future. So very happy, I hope to be with you celebrating the 10th anniversary of this conference in next year and be able to hug and shake hands with you. Thank you so much. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for that amazing presentation. Is that Her Excellency Maria Castillo Fernandez? Please give her another big round of applause. Under the title of Finding Our Path After the Pandemic, she focused multilateralism and partnership. She also presented our path forward out of the pandemic. We are going to take a 20-minute break, and we will also engage in some disease control measures here and come back after 20 minutes. And also, for those of you who are actively interacting with us online, we will pick 3 of you later on to give out souvenirs. So please interact with us online. We'll meet you back in 20 minutes. Also, another housekeeping announcement. We are going to have a group photo session for our delegates, for our VIP sitting in the This is the 9th Busan International Port Conference that will now invite our second special lecturer, who is the author of I Woke Up to Find Myself in an Advanced Nation. Bestseller author will speak under the title of The Path of the Korean Society in the Post-Pandemic Era. Please welcome Tae-woong Park, Chairman of the Board at Hanbit Media. Please give him a big round of applause. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very big conference. This is a personal honor for me. I don't think I've had the chance to speak before such a big audience after the pandemic. Once we can safely overcome the pandemic era, perhaps this is the world that we will be seeing, and this is quite encouraging for me. Today, I would like to talk about the path we should go after the pandemic era. This conference's catchphrase is what we have lost and what we must restore. I think that this is very relevant with what I would like to talk about today, because my presentation is what we have missed and what we must accomplish. The Republic of Korea has really been a fast follower and run at an extremely fast pace to come this far. I think that we are at its highest elevated position since the start of our nation. However, the problem is that we came here too soon, that we have lost so many things along the way. If we look at our history, they say that there may be shortcuts, but you cannot leapfrog over other different things. This means that you have to go through the entire process. And what I would like to say is that we have come so soon and so fast where we are today that we have lost many things. What are the things that we have lost? And because we have become an advanced nation for the first time ever in our history, what are the different challenges that we are facing now? Hopefully, there might be some things that I say today that you could remember and maybe could be of some help to you in your endeavors. I believe that COVID-19 was a coming of age for the Korean society, a belated coming of age, because COVID-19 was a phenomenon that it was a pandemic that impacted the entire world, and only then were we able to see how big we are and how powerful we are. This was a sudden awakening for us. So we were surprised by our own power. We could not believe it, and we were a little bit dazed and confused early on. And so this, I think, was a blessing in disguise, because when we look at our entire society, and at a certain point in time, we had this opportunity to look at where we are right now and take this opportunity of self-introspection and self-reflection. That is actually a very good opportunity. But although we are in a very painful transition right now, this is a blessing in disguise for Korea. Excuse me. Oh, almost overnight, we have seemingly become an advanced country. Somehow we could not believe it, but Bong Joon-ho won an Oscar. And it was something that he said this is for the locals in the Academy Award, that it's kind of an award for the industry insiders, but he still was able to win the highest honor of the night. And then Yoon Yo-jung won an award as well. BTS sang songs in the Korean language, but they are still at the top of the Billboard charts. And Squid Game recently became the smashed biggest records of Netflix ever since the founding of Netflix. And now we're seeing a situation where you add anything K to something and it automatically makes it elevated in status. K quarantine, K battery, K digital, K semiconductor, K shipbuilding. Somehow people think that if it's made in Korea, that it's of better quality. And it's not just us. If we look at exports, particularly of small and medium-sized enterprises, exports have increased by about 25% overall across the board because Korea's branding has become elevated in terms of its status. That is the only explanation we can come across, that this Korea brand is now very powerful. And UNCTAD, since its founding, recognized Korea as an advanced nation from a developing country. And in terms of our GDP, we are among the G7 countries. We were competing with Italy, and the recent latest statistics, we are slightly above Italy, so that makes us part of the G7. And although Japan placed the semiconductor sanctions, Korea was able to overcome that. Many people said that we wouldn't last 3 months, but we were able to overcome that. And now, many of Japan's semiconductors, components, parts makers are starting to set up operations in Korea. And another thing is what we call the Operation Miracle, which was an operation to remove the Koreans in Afghanistan. This operation was issued at the same time as Japan, but Operation Miracle, which was led by the Korean government, was successful in evacuating everyone. But in Japan, they only evacuated one person. It was a reporter, and this person was not even on the list at first, but this reporter later on managed to get on the flight manifest. What I think is very important is that Korea's 5-year CDS premium is ranked 4th after the US, Germany, and the UK. So if you take a closer look at this ranking, all of these countries are key currency printers. This means that these are countries who can just print money and borrow, pay back all their borrowings. That's the true of the US with their dollar. And Japan is also a country with a key currency with the yen. But for some reason, we were able to overtake Japan, and our premium ranks lower than Japan. So it's 4th in the world. And this is quite a shocking turn of events. How were we able to come this far? But of course, the path was never easy. We have a history of 5,000 years, but we also saw our independence only after the Second World War. And during the Cold War, we know that we had to really face severe costs and expenses. And because of that, we faced the Korean War, and we literally started out from the ruins of the Korean War with absolutely nothing. After the Second World War, after we found independence, democracy was given to us almost like lightning. And so we were not even familiar with democracy. The people who were voted in, the people who voted them in, we could not really differentiate between democracy and a sort of a kingdom or a monarchy. So students would practice for months instead of going to school and engage in mass games just because the president was visiting. And this was something that seemed to be very natural because the Korean people could not separate monarchy from democracy because it was something that happened so suddenly and overnight. However, the Republic of Korea was amazing in that we were able to experience victory several times as a society. As a group, collectively, we're able to experience victory many times. And in the history of the world, I think that it's only Korea who was able to experience this kind of societal-wide victory so many times, especially in contemporary society. Maybe in the past there were, but for example, if we look at the Asian financial crisis, there was something really shocking that occurred. This was the first time in the history of the world that this happened. When there's a financial crisis, when the country is in shambles, what happens is people buy dollars and they hide their gold because they know that their local currency is becoming worthless. So people hoard gold and hoard dollars, and so dollars and gold skyrocket in value. However, historically, the only time this happened was in Korea. When there was a financial crisis, gold was poured out by people. It was almost as much as 2 of the biggest gold mines found in Korea. Massive amounts of gold came out to the banks. And with this, in just 2 years, we're able to turn around the economic crisis. This is the first time this ever happened in the history of humanity. An amazing turn of events. There was a financial crisis, but people actively came together to sell and give up their gold. At the time, I think that our foreign currency, the exchange rate was about 2001. This means that Korean won was basically worthless. It was 50% the value of the dollar, but we willingly exchanged that for gold. And then this led to the June 29th declaration. That we can no longer just have these votes and counting in the gyms and the auditoriums. And this was done in a very peaceful way. People gathered and did some protests, and that was it. There was no deaths. There were no casualties. And as I mentioned before, although Japan placed those export sanctions and there was the COVID crisis, which was a huge disruption, Korea was able to very skillfully come out of this crisis. Many people consider that Korea would only last about 3 months, that Korea's economic growth rate would plummet, that we have to bow down and kowtow to Japan. But successfully, we were able to overcome that crisis as well. How were we able to do that? We have all these collective successes. How? If I were to explain all that, we would need to write a whole book, and I can't do this in 40 minutes. So I would like to urge you to buy my book and read the chapters there. But I would like to talk about one chapter in that book, which is the success case of K-pop and K-drama. And perhaps this could give us some insight looking at the secret to the success of Korea as a whole. In 1996 to 2006, so for the decade of years, this was considered the golden age of Korean film. It was the golden age that came overnight. With 1995, Number 3, Green Fish, or Christmas in August, and No More Tears Left to Cry, Peppermint Candy, and Sorum, or The Revenge is Mine. All of these different Korean old cinema in fact, what is surprising is that 8 of these 15 films were made by new directors. In fact, this is around the time when Bong Joon-ho made his debut. So what happened to have this golden age of Korean cinema in the 10 years from 1996 to 2006? In 96, what happened was that censorship, or especially pre-censorship, was abolished. Pre-censorship is where you see Farewell at Midnight by Bae-ho. It was talking about how if curfew is at midnight, when are you going to go home after midnight? So this was censored. And Cho Young-nam's Unlit Window was censored because you can't talk about unlit windows because windows should be light. And Lee Jang-hee's It's You was censored for being strange and it's provocative, and Yang Hee-eun's For Love That Wasn't to Be was censored because there isn't any love that cannot be. Love should always be. So if there was this kind of censorship, then we wouldn't see the kind of content like Squid Game. It was like living in China at the time because life itself was like Squid Game. But the secret to human intelligence and creativity is the free combination of neurons. When our neurons can be given free rein and be allowed to combine with each other, that is when human intelligence and creativity are ultimately unleashed. We can find many examples of this. Steve Jobs with Pixar, when he built Pixar, there's a famous anecdote that he only tried to create one set of bathrooms to make everyone meet somehow on their way to the bathrooms, to the restrooms. Because he believed that in all of these different accidental conversations and water cooler conversations, that's when curiosity is sparked. And ultimately, there were created 2 sets of restrooms, but in any case, this allows for people to have these very accidental and coincidental conversations, and Pixar became a worldwide best-selling company. Google, Facebook, Netflix, they continue to encourage this culture of experimentation. If you want to do any tests, You can raise your hand and find a colleague to carry out the experiments with you. And this kind of organizational culture is there to try to allow for the free combination of neurons. Silicon Valley has extremely high property values because the city itself is a platform. In Silicon Valley, before COVID-19, this is where the most number of meetups occurred. Hundreds of meetups occurring every night of people meeting up saying, hey, I am contributing to open source. I want to meet someone who can fix these issues for me in open source software co-development. And then other people raise your hands, and that's how you could lead up to all these meetups, hundreds of meetups, accidental, serendipitous meetups that occur every night. So the city itself was functioning like a platform. So even despite the insane real estate prices in San Francisco, despite the smell of urine and all those homeless people, Google, Facebook cannot leave the city. And in 1996, when we abolished pre-censorship, we unleashed human intelligence and creativity through the free combination of neurons. And within just 10 years, we're able to see these massive results, followed by Squid Game, BTS, and Parasite. Now, this is becoming global phenomena, becoming a contributor to soft power. And in fact, we're very familiar with the expression of soft power. This is something that we used to read in textbooks. We only just read about in school. But now Korea is a soft power powerhouse in 2021. That is where we stand right now. It's quite an amazing feat. When I was young, when there was a U.S. Army patrol car, a Jeep running by, we would just follow after the U.S. soldiers asking for chocolate. And when you were able to buy, flour, bread made of flour, baked with flour, when the U.S. soldiers would split some with you, you consider yourself lucky. But now we have come all this way. But as I mentioned before, this happened so soon. So there are many different challenges that confront us now. And this is where I would like to shift my presentation. I want to say that we always define before we act. Korea society is very not familiar with the fact of making definitions because we were the fastest follower in the world. So we were not the ones who laid out the correct answers. We would watch what the US is doing. We would see what Japan was making, or we would see how Germany produces their products, and we just copied what they did. And we did that in an amazing pace, and that was enough. This means that we didn't have to invest in R&D. You don't have to invest in core technology, because you just needed to copy what others did. And that means you save on those expenses. So if you did a good job copying the products, you can sell something similar to US products or Japanese products, a little lesser in quality, but much cheaper. And that's how we came this far. And it's the same when it comes to school education. It was always multiple choice. Of these 4 options, there's one correct answer. Remember it. Memorize the correct answers. And if you memorize the correct answers, one day you can do well on the test. This led to standardization, mass production. It was perfect for industry and manufacturing. But now we wake up and realize that we're in a 4th industrial revolution now. But the kids are still only optimized for a pre-industrial society, a kind of industrial society for the past. And so this is a skill mismatch. We have 2 options we can choose from right now. We can just sit still and just wait. Maybe we can wait for other leaders to get ahead of us and maybe copy them. Or if not, because we're at the front, we have to ask ourselves, what is the correct answer? We have to define the way forward. Because there are no correct answers that are given to us. We have to think our way out, because whose batteries are you going to copy? Whose shipbuilding industries are you going to copy? Whose semiconductor industry are you going to copy? Because we're already at the front. There is no one else left to copy. You can't just give somebody the correct answer, ask them to memorize it, just copy what you see on the blackboard, because we can't do that anymore. We're at the leader of the pack. Let me make one example. In the European Union, there is something called white paper and there's something called green paper. I actually have not heard about green paper very recently, the new administration or the current administration. They talk about Industry 4.0 or this current ROK administration with the Fourth Industrial Revolution. They copied this paper left by the EU on Industry 4.0 and I was very curious about it. I read it and there was Industry 4.0 was published together with Labor 4.0, and it also talks about if there are these changes uprooting industry, what are the changes that will impact labor? And so I looked at Labor 4.0, and this green paper, or 2 years before the white paper was published, there was a green paper that was published, a paper list of questions asking about how labor is going to change when all these changes are going to come to industry. How are we going to keep and hold on to all these quality jobs in the midst of all these industrial transformations? That was the report that was issued in German society. And for about 2 years, German civil society, the industry, academia, and labor, they came together to try to solve and come up with the answers to this. And after 2 years of fact-finding and discussions, the Industry 4.0 white paper was issued. So the white paper is actually a result of all of the public discussions and all of the questions that were raised for the 2 years after the green paper was issued. However, the Korean government only looked at the white paper. We did not look at the green paper, the list of questions and all of the public discourse that followed. So instead of just looking at the context and the results, we only focused on the result. In the Labor 4.0, the green paper questions, they were really insightful questions, and I wanted to share some of them with you. Well, first, will almost all people still have jobs in the future despite digitization? Because we hear about how AI and robot automation are going to steal people's jobs. So despite that, how can we hold on to quality jobs? How are we going to have those jobs? This was a question that was raised to German society, and society was tasked with the job to find out the answer to this question. How will new business models such as digital platforms affect the future of work? We've heard about platforms and platform work or gig work. All of the costs and risks are basically pushed at society, and platforms only reap the benefits. So, for example, with the parcel delivery workers or the motorcycle delivery workers, they're not subscribing to employment insurance. But over 50% of these riders go through these accidents, industrial accidents, every year because they have to speed or they have to go through all of these very risky driving incidents. And so about 50% of them go through industrial accidents, but they are not compensated because they don't have employment insurance. We have these new platform industry. It's a completely new industry, so we need a new set of rules. And this question asks about those set of rules. How can we utilize machines to support human labor and enhance human capabilities in the future if humans and machines work together? When robots and machines or AI, if they were to control or dictate things to us, versus if they can encourage and enhance our capabilities, we would obviously want to do the latter. How can we make that happen? This is the question that's being asked. And the work of the future will be more resilient. How specifically will the temporal and spatial flexibilities be enabled for the benefit of the workers? This question is really about flexible work. And it's saying that laborers also want flexible work. Many workers want that. I maybe want to work 2 days a week, or maybe I just want to work X number of hours a day. This is a demand that can be made by workers. For temp workers or non-regular workers, maybe that is not necessarily a bad thing. That maybe some people want it. They desire flexible work. But can we make sure that this flexible work be done in a way that is helpful and beneficial to the people, in a way that is structured to do away with the inequalities that temp working can bring? So it's very philosophical and of kind of a transitional and transformational question. But in Korea, we ignored all of these questions. We did not look at all of these questions, and we tried to just simply copy the white paper or the answers to the questions. So this is very problematic because we don't know the context of where the questions came from, and there was no social consensus. This is a correct answer that was given by another country, by Germany. Only when there is social consensus, when all of society says that is the path we should go towards, then we can have that social momentum. But in this case, we just took a German white paper and translated it into Korean and say that, okay, this is what we're going to do now. This is not enough to create that kind of drive or momentum. We have to look at all of these challenges together and collectively reach a set of consensus and have a consensus about the path forward. And if we had done that, then we could have had so much of a driving force to bring about transformation in the future. And if we can think about that opportunity that we missed, it's quite unfortunate because we could have really leveraged that possibility. So the fact that we are an advanced nation, it's important for us to realize that questioning is more important than coming up with answers. Albert Einstein said that if I had an hour to save this planet, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes to solve it. This means that asking the right questions is much more important than trying to coming up with the solutions. And only then, when we realize that, we can become an advanced nation. I want to talk about compromise. We, as a nation, have never really learned about how to compromise or negotiate because we just memorized the right answer. So we didn't have to compromise. We just had to follow the right path. But that's not how human beings are. Because there is no scenario in the world when one counterparty always wins. You have to meet each other halfway. But in Korea, I think that we're very much addicted to Joseon dynasty because I don't know why we are always talking about restraint principle because, you say, you place an axe next to you, and if you don't want to listen to what I say, then you can take this axe and feel free to chop off my head. It's, if you have all of these different, you write online petitions and saying that if I'm wrong, you can strike me down. And this is still lauded across Korean society, but I think that this is very pre-modern kind of mindset. Again, I have to turn to Germany. After the Second World War, Germany was berated with questions because people wanted to know, are we ever going to see another Hitler? What are you going to do to make sure there's never another Hitler? This is a scary question because, Hitler was voted in democratically. There was an election process, and he was voted in legitimately, and later he became the head of the German nation, and then he went on to perpetrate all the mass killings. So German society, they had all the democratic mechanisms, but they were unable to stop such a killer from taking power. So this was a very massive question that they had to deal with. And so many people gathered together at a small city called Beutelspach, where they talked about what can we do to prevent this kind of atrocity from happening again. They had a very intense discussion, and they came up with 3 kind of consensus, as you can see here. One is that democracy itself is not enough. We need democratic citizens, civic-minded citizens with a high level of awareness, because if we don't have that, then we cannot stop a next Hitler. We need an awakened set, an enlightened set of citizens. And we have to kind of always work to try to create that kind of citizenship to happen. That's Beutelspach consensus. In Germany, in civic studies, they have this goal of political education or civic education there. In Germany, to try to create civic-minded citizens, from 5th grade all the way up to high school, they provide civics education where you learn about your rights and you try to compromise your own interests in the spirit of solidarity. And you try to also consider the interests of those who have incurred losses and in some cases concede to them. You have to have the ability to recognize the social function of conflict. And you have to have the willingness to be involved in conflict resolution by choosing suitable ideas. I want to talk a little bit about conflict here. People think that conflict is all wrong, that we have to avoid conflict at all costs and we just have to always get along with one another. But I think that conflict is very important. It's like taking on the ability to learning how to deal with pain. If you don't know how to feel pain, then you're dead. If you don't feel pain, if you're sitting in a very hot chair that's hot enough to kill you, or if you fall down and your head splits open and you're bleeding, but you don't feel pain, then you will hemorrhage to death. That is what I mean by conflict. When there are small conflicts, when there's a problem that you have to confront, the conflict is basically a sign that there is a problem that you have to fix. When you see the conflict, you work together, compromise, negotiate, and try to find social consensus through that, then you can prevent the big incidents from occurring. So if there's conflict, this means that there is a problem coming. It's a symptom of a problem coming. And this is something that is very helpful because you know early on in advance what could happen. When you can deal with conflicts in a healthy way, then you can learn to think big. And so you have to understand the social function of conflict, and you have to get involved in conflict resolution by choosing suitable ideas. And this is a very important attitude to take towards life. You also have to endure difficulties, make use of opportunities for self-development, and be tolerant to others while being part of various social groups. Unfortunately, in Korea, we try to categorize people based on a certain set of parameters. We just memorize things, and that is the basis through which we memorize and categorize other people. We don't really have the ability to be very tolerant of others. We don't have the kind of diversity to think about the people who may have incurred losses or not. I know there are many people who look around society and say, why are there so many psychopaths in our society? Maybe there's some kind of training going on to try to foster more psychopaths. Because none of us really have not been trained to compromise or think about the other person or think from the shoes of the other person. We don't have the ability to be tolerant. How do you learn to be tolerant right now? We need a new set of indicators and new objectives. If a person who is 30 years old continues to take his height, measure his height every day, and say, why am I not getting taller? When you're 30, you have to look at your blood pressure or your blood sugar level and see if you're healthy. But let's say in Korean society right now, I feel that we're watching a man who is 30 years old who's trying to measure his height every day and wondering why is he not getting taller. This is a very important graph. When you look at the health of a society, there are many different indicators: literacy rate, mortality rate of girls, murder, infant mortality rate, social trust, obesity, mental health. Many of these different indicators such as life expectancy, social confidence, but many people say that this is not necessarily correlated to GDP because sometimes GDP can be up or down regardless of these different indicators. But if the gap between the rich and the poor is high, then you can really map this along an X and Y coefficient in a very precise manner. And ILO, OECD, and IMF in 2014 and 15 published these reports saying that the Gini coefficient, which talks about inequality, it's more unequal if it's closer to 1 and equal closer to 0. When the Gini coefficient dropped by 0.03, the economic growth rate fell by a whopping 0.35 basis points or percentage points. So if we look at the Gini coefficient expresses perfect equality at 0, and Gini coefficient of 1 expresses maximal inequality. And we looked at 85 to 2005 and cumulative growth rate from 1990 to 2010. And the IMF said that the phenomenon where income is concentrated at the very top would undermine stable economic growth, and the redistribution policies bring about higher growth and sustainable growth. The ILO and the IMF and the OECD were saying this. And it's surprising that the IMF said this because the redistribution policies will bring about higher growth and sustainable growth. And it's surprising that the IMF said this because many people consider IMF a mouthpiece for rich nations. There's also poverty reduction rate, where we looked at the number of population who can exit from poverty. Korea is about 19.5. The OECD average is 64.1. We were only focused on GDP, that unbeknownst to us, all of these things were happening. The taxes were almost completely not useful in bringing about poverty reduction rate. In fact, there was a recent report saying that Korea's poverty reduction rate is about fourth in the world, that although our GDP is nearly close to G7, then maybe we need even more of a GDP. Do we, though? But because why do we need more of a gross domestic product when our taxes have not been really making themselves useful? Why do we need more of a GDP? What are we going to do when we're already in the group of 7 nations? Our poverty reduction is not increasing. So why are we still insisting on waking up every day and measuring our height? We're already 30 years old. And also in Korea, this is a very harsh society, especially on the elderly. If you take a look at this, compared to other countries, senior population age 60 or older, there is a huge gap between them. Korea is 24% or so. The OECD is 80.8%. This is the poverty reduction rate. This is because after you're 60 years old, it's very difficult for you to have full employment. Companies refuse to hire senior citizens. So you're placed in a very difficult situation, which is why taxation policies have to provide subsidies to the elderly. Korea also has the highest suicide rate in the world. But the average suicide rate is quite high, but you have to multiply that by 2.4-fold to get to the suicide rate of the elderly, because we not only have the highest suicide rate on average, but the highest suicide rate of the elderly. So do we really need more of a gross domestic product when we are obviously doing it at the expense of the elderly? We have to invest in education for the future because, as I mentioned, we're the front runner. McKinsey come up with top tech trends every year, and this year's trends say that we will experience more technological progress in the coming decade than we did in the preceding 100 years put together. Smartphones first came to Korea in 2010, at the end of 2009. It's only been here about 12 years. In just 12 years, the entire world is centered on our smartphones. Fax machines, cameras, MP3 player manufacturers, they're all out of business. They're gone. This only happened in the last 12 years. And yet we are still trying to look for correct answers. We make our students memorize and teach them by rote. Think about it. When a student graduates, they have to make a living based on things that they never learned in school. I first came upon the internet in 1993. I first had my smartphone in 2010. It's about 12 years ago. I didn't learn about smartphones in school. The only thing that is certain in our new normal is that we will always have uncertainty. Why should we have to make our students memorize things that are completely useless and they will never use outside of the school? That's not what education is for. Education is a way to teach students to try to, when they face something that is uncertain and new to them, to take it and make it their own and find a solution. That is the only skill that we need in this new normal of uncertainty, because once you graduate school, you're going to have to deal with things that you've never seen before in your life. In Korea, our functional illiteracy is the world's highest. King Sejong the Great did an amazing job with Hangul, and so we can read it, but our literacy rate is quite low. OECD in 2013 did a study based on interviews with 150,000 people from 22 countries, and they were able to see that in other countries, literacy peaks at the age group of 30 and 35, but Korea, literacy reaches its peak in the early 20s, and then it plummets drastically as the older the people get. And the OECD researcher says that when you get older and you don't read books, then your literacy level goes down. Why do we not read in Korea? Because the public education system in Korea makes it so that we just give up books. We just hate them so much. After you graduate high school, you burn up your books and you just, and then if you have to take another year because you couldn't get into the college of your choice, you have to purchase those books again. But in any case, in Korea, because everything, you have to cram to get into the good schools, you just learn to hate books as a whole. This is really terrible. It's a kind of lethal sort of education. And it's the case with digital literacy. We did the lowest in the assessment of information reliability by clicking on a phishing email. When Korean people are given some sentences to read, we lack the ability to tell fact from fiction. There's so many victims of phishing emails in Korea. Why are these elderly citizens always sharing all of these fake news on their Kakao platforms? This is the reason why, because of our low digital literacy rates. This is also something that OECD announced through their PISA studies. In the 21st century, literacy is about constructing and validating knowledge on your own, but our education system is failing our students. And this is the ultimate conclusion. A society that guarantees the free combination of neurons, understands the importance of questions ahead of answers, can discuss and make compromises, pursues the health of the whole society, teaches our children how to study on one's own and how to live harmoniously with others. This is the society that we want to go towards, because we have somehow woken up to find ourselves an advanced nation, the highest level that we've found ourselves on since the birth of our country. And this is how we're going to maintain this position. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Tae-woong Park, Chairman of the Board of Hanbit Media, titled The Path of the Korean Society in the Post-Pandemic Era. Please give him another warm hand. So we are listening to very interesting and insightful lectures. Next speaker is Dr. Daniel Lee, research scientist of International Vaccine Institute, and he will give us his lecture titled "The Vaccine, a Beacon of Hope in the Fight Against Pandemics." Please welcome him with a big hand. Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Lee, research scientist at International Vaccine Institute. I'm researching on how to distribute vaccines to developing countries more efficiently and effectively. I'm very honored and privileged to deliver my lecture in this BIPC 2021. I had two concerns. The first is that my lecture might not have much to do with port. And the second concern is that the Korean people, every Korean is almost a vaccine expert. So I believe, they know much more than me about the platform as well as the vaccine efficacies. So I was not sure whether I can be of any help. And today I'd like to focus on three areas: what I have learned and what I have felt. So when we have another different type of pandemic, how can we better respond to that? This picture was drawn probably back in 13th century or 14th century during the days of a plague. It house where a plague patient was found, then the public officials would go and mark the door. That is another form of isolation. And back then, you can see in the picture that they were trying to beat up a dog. They did not know the pathogen. That is why they tried to kill any animals on the street. And this is probably a picture of the 14th century or 15th century. The boat was at the port. No, actually off the shore and waiting there for 20 days or 30 days. So this is another form of quarantine back in the 14th century or 15th century. If you go all the way to the origin of the word quarantine, that is Trentino in Italian, which means 30 days, and which was translated into quarantino, which means 40 days. And now we have the word quarantine. So although the behavior or how it is done, the quarantine might have different, but whenever there was a pandemic, quarantine was used as a measure to respond to it. Back in the days of the Spanish flu in the United States, people stood and waited in queue to buy a face mask. And if the mask was not worn properly, and a policeman actually would try to correct the behavior. And back then, we already have this anti-mask group. And there were other groups of people who were for the mask wearing. In the 18th century, cholera was widespread, and then people did not know how that was transmitted. And John Snow, the father of modern epidemiology, did the epidemiological investigation, and he found that cholera was a waterborne. Even before the invention of microscope, he identified that cholera was transmitted through contaminated water. So this shows us that epidemiological investigation has long played a pivotal role in the disease control. There is a disease AIDS, and in the first few years, but people did not know how that was transmitted. People did not know that that was transmitted via sexual relationship. So it was dubbed a gay-related infectious disease, but people did not know anything about the disease. So people believed that AIDS was transmitted because of the homosexuality that was intensively highlighted by many media. All in all, we can see history repeats itself. Well, this is the global examples of emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases over the past 2 to 3 decades. Many of us do not know that how many pandemics we have had over the last 2 to 3 decades. That means that we have effectively responded to many of these diseases. The first lesson I'd like to share with you today is that pandemic is for sure to come. Many people ask me whether we will have another pandemic. My answer is that you have to ask a better question: when we will have the next pandemic. We have the increasing number of pandemics and then novel viruses. That's because of the global warming, while leading to new breeds of plants and animals and viruses as well. And in order to tackle the food security issues, we are raising bigger group of cattle and cattle stocks, and this is a past and perfect condition for viruses to spread further. So with the development and evolution of the humanity, the virus would evolve as well. That means we will have pandemic more frequently than before. So the question is whether we will have a pandemic or not. But that's the better question would be when we will have a pandemic. There are 26 vaccine-preventable infectious diseases, not that many, because there are so many causes of a disease, environmental causes as well. That is why we have so many diseases. And in addition to that, in addition to this list, we have COVID-19. And you might have some of them, and others you might not have heard. But for against these diseases, you have been vaccinated. So vaccination is a very effective and important tool in healthcare. I'm not sure whether there is any other tool that can save more lives than the vaccination, other than the clean drinking water. Smallpox was completely eradicated thanks to vaccines. And polio might be the next disease which can be perfectly prevented through vaccination. There are 26 different types of vaccines. You might wonder why only 2 diseases have been wiped out and eradicated. But vaccine is to control and prevent infectious diseases. But in order to eliminate and root out diseases, we have to more researches and trials. But as for the efficacies and effects of vaccine, we can have much more benefits than saving lives. And thanks to the saved lives, we can have many social effects. There are various vaccines which can prevent cancer, cervical cancers, and hepatitis B. And B, if you can have the vaccination for hepatitis B, then you can prevent hepatitis and the cancer, liver cancer, ultimately. And many people around the world, especially those who are underprivileged in the society, well, once they have a disease, then their consumption or medical spending will skyrocket, and this will push them into poverty, below the poverty line. So if we can successfully prevent a disease thanks to vaccination, then we can have a much better livelihood for those people in poverty or below the poverty line. So you can see this virtuous circle which shows the impact of immunization beyond health. If a child is vaccinated, then he will have a longer life expectancy, and with that, the child will have fewer and less serious illnesses. And this means a lower care cost for the health system as well as for the family. And the family will have more money available for saving or spending. And child, healthy and sound, can attend school more, leading to better outcome for the family. The family will have economic outlook, which is much better. And with this, birth rate drops because now if you have 2 children, then the children will live to 6 years old or 7 years old. So in this case, well, since they can stay healthy, well, you don't need to have many children. And then this leads to mother's health improvement, and the community will be more economically stable and productive. So for tigers of Asia, those 4 nations, according to the research on those 4 Asian countries by World Bank and the Development Bank, well, their economic success, at least 30 to 40% is attributable to vaccination, according to this research. So vaccination leads to lower child and infant mortality rates, and these children can go to school, and they can join the workforce, an economically active population. So this is a virtuous circle created through and starting from vaccination. In advanced nations, it's relatively easy for those advanced nations, to introduce a new type of immunization because they have the government budget and as well as the advanced healthcare infrastructure. But for underdeveloped nations, it's quite difficult. That is why there are various types of researches to see the effects of immunization. So this is an expected return for every $1 invested in vaccination. So on average, well, the country can get $16 as a return for $1 invested in vaccination. This is a longer-term benefit the country can enjoy in terms of the preschool education. if any country will make an investment in a preschool education, the expected return is $7. But as for vaccination, the expected return is $16 per every dollar spent on vaccination. That is why more countries are actively introducing and rolling out a vaccination program. If vaccination is that important and that critical, then why do we have only 26 types of vaccines? So here you can see the time when the pathogen was discovered and the time when vaccine was invented. You can see it took about 40 to 50 years from the pathogen discovery to the vaccine invention. So over that 4 to 5 decades, there must be multiple steps and phases to identify how serious the pathogen is. But anyway, on average, it takes like 4 to 5 decades. Then this kind of time is required because of the critical trial. So this is the process how a clinical trial is done. The first step would be preclinical research in a lab. If a researcher believes, well, this might worthwhile to develop a vaccine, then you'd do the animal testing and on rabbit and on guinea pig and then on a monkey. The monkey is really expensive. So only after you can see the efficacy and the stability and safety, then you can move on to human clinical testing and the clinical trial. You can do this phase 1 clinical trial on dozens of people. Then you can expand the scope of the clinical trial in phase 2, and then you can move on to phase 3 and phase 4. You have to go through these multiple different phases. That is why at the end of the day, you'd have to spend 15 years and more than $1 billion to bring one product to the market. So most of the cases, well, they are screened out. So let's say you have 10 different products and only one of them passes all the way up to phase 1. So the risk is very high for the pharmaceutical companies. That is why not many companies would be determined to develop a pharmaceutical company. If there is such a marketability and high probability of success, then the companies would be more than willing to put in an investment. But the vaccination market and pharmaceutical market in developing country is not as advanced as in the developed country. So situations are so different as well. That is why not every country has an advanced pharmaceutical company which makes a huge investment in vaccine development. And the vaccine development is focused more on more marketable and profitable product. So on average, it takes 4 to 5 decades for any vaccine to be fully developed and become available in the market. But as for COVID-19 vaccine, it took only 1.5 years or 2 years. But last year, I asked so many questions when the COVID-19 vaccine would become available. And the next question I received quite a lot is when they can get the vaccination. And the last part of the question is whether it's safe or not. Generally, the preclinical and phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, all these steps a vaccination needs to pass. But rather than completing phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3, well, in the middle of phase 1, phase 2 started. When in the middle of phase 2, phase 3 started. And in the middle of phase 3, the manufacturing factory was built. This might incur huge losses on the part of the pharmaceutical companies, but they decided to proceed with the development of the vaccine. Phase 3 and phase 4, phase 2 for COVID-19 vaccine have not been completed, and long-term safety testing is still on their way. And the safety as well as the efficacy and the stability testing is still on their way. The evaluation trial in humans and efficacy trial in humans are Also, in progress, if any part of the vaccine is found not safe, then that will be shared throughout the world. And we have more evidence for the safety as well as the efficacy. So generating and creating the vaccine itself is not enough. The fair distribution and equitable distribution of the vaccine is as important as that. WHO and other international organizations have launched the COVAX. Each and every country does not have the capacity to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies and the manufacturers of COVID-19 vaccine effectively. That is why these international organizations have launched the COVAX, and 189 countries have joined COVAX. Well, the intent was very good, but as you know all too well, the supply of COVID-19 vaccine is not sufficient. So on the right side, you can see the target, and on the left, that's the actual supply. The target by COVAX and then the actual supply, there is such a gap. The vaccine is being manufactured in such a huge quantity, but the production is not speeding up as much as we initially expected. So this is a biological substance. Biological substance can be extracted only from a living organism. The living organism does not grow as fast as we would want it to. And the factories need to obtain the certification and the approval. So I believe what is the most critical issue here is the vaccine supply, and we will see the redoubling of the effort to secure vaccine supply. And this is a streamlined chart of vaccine manufacturing. There are hundreds of different steps involved. So you would do sterilization, you would grow the living organism, whether you would dispatch it. So anyway, there are hundreds and hundreds of different steps. So if we open a factory today, it will take at least 2 to 3 years for the factory to start to produce vaccine. So this is very time consuming. It's not like that you can produce a vaccine as soon as you build a factory. And the process of vaccine manufacturing itself should be extremely sterile. And you should have a good process. Only then that you can ensure the efficacy, safety, as well as the stability. And a vaccine is the pharmaceutical item, the medical product, which requires the highest level of the hygiene. That is why the evaluation needs to be thorough as well. As for the treatment, well, this is for those who already are affected by the disease. However, the vaccination is for those who do not have the virus, and this is to prevent the virus. That is why you need to ensure the quality in the first place. That is why it is very time consuming and you have to be extra cautious. And that is why we have to focus more on the collaboration and the cooperation. So the second lesson is that although it is really time consuming, we were able to develop this COVID-19 vaccine in such a short span of time thanks to the solidarity and collaboration. So somebody will mention that this was like a Manhattan project. Well, thanks to the innovation and collaboration and solidarity of all the government, we were able to develop COVID-19 vaccine in a matter of 1.5 years. So this might be an opportunity for us to rewrite the textbook on the history of vaccination. And with the COVID-19 vaccine development, we were able to completely overhaul the vaccine manufacturing and development process.
One of the other questions that we get is that the pharmaceutical companies have the IP and the patents, and if they can release the patents, maybe other companies can also be very quick to do vaccine manufacturing. But even with one vaccine, there are many different multiple patents, much of intellectual property. This is the patent portfolio of the RNA vaccine. Some of the patents are tied up with one company, some by another company, and one company has given to another company exclusive license of the product. So if we were to try to go through all of this patent and IP portfolio to try to create one vaccine, there are many different IP-related issues that you have to navigate. And this all merits kind of review. So when we look at technology, there's schools, universities, labs, pharma companies. Typically, one researcher makes a breakthrough research. In a small university, it's difficult for them to commercialize this kind of research. So they collaborate with a big company, and the big company will purchase that technology and then commercialize that kind of breakthrough technology. So they would invest in this technology and then continue to develop it. So as you can see, this vaccine technology would go from one company to another company and then be shared across different companies. So this is a very complicated web of IP, which is why when it comes to vaccine development and patents, there's a lot of different complicated homework that we have to do. So it's not very cut and clear that one company has access to all of the different patents and the IP for that one kind of vaccine. Which is why in terms of supply, there is huge demand, but the purchasers, they have the money and they're willing to pay for it, but because the products are not available, typically, the vaccines are sold to the highest paying, the highest bidders, or advanced countries. And it is the advanced countries that invested most heavily in the vaccine development. But as of mid-October, if we take a look at these 4 groups of companies by income, the lowest income groups, they've only been vaccinated less than 1% of the world vaccination rate. Of course, we have to take the population into consideration, but as you can see here, developing countries, they have a very low vaccination rate. When they have a very low vaccination rate, this means that this can lead to a humanitarian crisis. Obviously, the COVID vaccine can prevent you from getting COVID, but what's more importantly is that it can prevent you from dying of COVID-19 or getting severe complications from COVID-19. And if the developing countries do not have access to the doses, of course, it would depend on your underlying conditions and your age, but senior citizens and elderly or immunocompromised population could lead to more deaths out of COVID. The second is a biological crisis. This is something that we've already seen, that viruses can mutate. We've already seen this already. The viruses continue to mutate, and these different mutant streams would continue to come. If we have vaccines and therapeutics, the vaccines have to fight against these vaccines and therapeutics. So what they do is they evolve and then mutate. And so we'll see all these mutant streams of viruses that come about if we do not vaccinate more members of the population. Which is why in many countries, even in advanced countries, among the unvaccinated members of the population, we'll see these mutant strains, and we don't know what's going to happen with these mutant variants. And lastly is an economic crisis. This means that, according to a research, in 2021, of all of the global economic causes of the pandemic, about 50% would be borne by advanced economies. So this means that even if the vaccination rate is low in the developing countries and a lot of the COVID-19 pandemic would occur in the developing countries, it would be the advanced countries that would have to pay for much of the costs, which is why many countries were incentivized to participate in more of the equitable vaccine distribution. A lesson that we can learn from here is that when you are thirsty and you start digging the well, it's too late. When you start building factories and building labs, when a pandemic comes, it's going to be late. If we do this again at the next pandemic, we're going to be late regardless of what we do, which is why we have to learn from all of these lessons and try to see where we're going to go from here. As I mentioned before, vaccinations have to be very, very safe. That's very important. But when we look at all therapeutics and medicines, there are going to be risks and benefits. Even if you take an aspirin or a Tylenol, because you pick up some Tylenol at the convenience store because you have a headache, if you open the box, there is going to be some risk factors that are listed on the back of the box. Even if you look at aspirins or Tylenol, which is very safe to use, there will be some risk factors. In everything that we do, there's going to be risks and benefits. So, with vaccines, of course, vaccines have to be safe. But the standard, the threshold for safety, has to be placed somewhere to look at the risk and benefit and do that analysis. If you take a look at this chart, it's about 2 out of every 10,000. The blue represents the benefits and the red represents the risks. So it's very clear cut. The blue obviously outweigh the risk. So through vaccinations, the benefits far outweigh the expected risks when you have vaccinations. And this gets bigger the more that the outbreak is exacerbated. So for senior citizens in their 70s who are hesitant about vaccines, they're not that hesitant about vaccines because they look at the chart and they know that the risks are much lower than benefits, which is why I thought that there were many people here in Korea who participated in vaccinations, and that was very encouraging because if we look at these kinds of charts and statistics, the public health authorities would use this and say that for vaccinations, when there are side effects of the vaccinations, it's very individual. Maybe it could occur to 1 out of 10,000. If that one person happens to be you, then it's 100% for you. So there's a little bit of a gap here because the side effects could be very individual, but those individual little statistics come together to form collective statistics. So it's kind of like a probability game. But this is how it is with the safety profile of medicines. You cannot say that this is completely safe 100%, so please take the vaccine. That's never going to be the right way to persuade people to take the vaccine, but you have to give them a clear risk profile assessment. When you do that, then many people will make the rational decision, which is what we've seen in Korea. Vaccine hesitancy in Korea, we've looked at vaccine hesitancy from March to September. In March, there weren't that many people who had access to the vaccine, so it was a little bit different. But we asked people, are you going to get the vaccine? There is a kind of middle ground who say that I'm not going to rush to get the vaccine, but I'm also not going to not get the vaccine. So it's always easier to get to the first 80%, then the next 10%, then the next 10%, and the last 1%, the last mile. Even if you invest double or triple the investment, you cannot get to that last 1%. It's just very difficult to reach that last hesitant number. So with the red, you see that it has gone a little bit down, but they're still unvaccinated and not willing to get vaccinated. Those who are a little bit hesitant at the beginning, they end up later getting vaccinated. At first, they see all these media reports who are very sensational, talk about the vaccines are not safe or they're not efficacious or that somebody died after they got the vaccine. But then when they see the people around them getting vaccinated and everybody appears safe and healthy, then the initially hesitant people, they later on get vaccinated. So the yellow, they have gone down. And this is not just true of Korea. If you look at other countries, it's the same. With the other countries, the red is the percentage of people who refuse to get vaccinated. And this is December 2020. And on the bottom chart, that's October 2021. You see the red. The red people who are vaccinated and they are unwilling to get vaccinated. These are the people who are very difficult to convince. But if you look at the others, the light blue and the orange, if we just make a little bit more of an effort, they get vaccinated. This is the same in Korea, in the US, other countries. We can get to a certain threshold of a percentage, but after that, it's very difficult to reach the last 1% or the last few percent. But in the case of Korea, we're able to see very good vaccination rates, especially with the young population. After you get to a certain rate, we have to try to reach out to that red, the last few remaining vaccine hesitant people, but that's just very difficult to do. Before COVID-19, we looked at the top 10 global health threats by WHO. One of them is vaccine hesitancy. Why are people so hesitant to get vaccinated? One of them is misinformation or fake news. We've seen this, how you get vaccinated, that will change your DNA, or you could be a slave to Bill Gates, or all these ridiculous kind of conspiracy theories. The second is, this is quite big, many people, because they haven't gotten sick with COVID-19, or they don't really know anybody who've gotten sick with COVID-19, so they underplay the severity of COVID-19. So they think that maybe it's not that bad, maybe it's not that serious. Earlier on, when Lee Ju-yeol, a comedian in Korea, when he died of lung cancer for smoking, that was when many people suddenly became familiar with the risks of smoking. When you know someone who has been sick with COVID-19, I am sure that that person would have gotten vaccinated. But if you don't know anybody who got sick with COVID-19, then you don't really know the severity. The third is that some people believe there's still a debate. Some people think that I've heard that the vaccine is not completely efficacious, that it's only 80% efficacious, or etc. The fourth is people misinterpret information. They only look at certain sites. They only look at certain online bulletin boards that are just the same sounding boards to what they believe. And because that's the only information that they have access to, when you ask them about vaccinations, they're going to be biased. They're going to be very prejudiced, which is why we have to continue to disseminate very accurate information. The next is where you hear about these anecdotes and stories about things that happen to someone you know or somebody's friend that you know versus scientific fact. And some people also think that if you don't get vaccinated, then maybe there will be fewer risks. People think that I think that vaccines could be a little bit risky, so therefore I will not get the vaccine, and that is my way of lowering my risk. And the last reason is there's distrust of the government. You don't trust the government, so you don't want to do what they say. So for all of these different reasons, people are hesitant to get vaccinated. We have to overcome these challenges so that we can get to that last red percentage of people who are refusing to be vaccinated. If we ask people in Korea, are you going to get vaccinated? The blue bar continues to go up, and the red is kind of constant. That's the last members of the population refusing to get vaccinated. If you ask people, why would you want to get vaccinated? This is from August, and the biggest response was that I don't want my family to get infected because of me. That's why I'm going to get vaccinated. For me, as a clinical researcher, this is quite surprising because we were able to only prove number 3 here, where the vaccines would prevent. The number 1 reason is that the vaccines would prevent that subject, that person, from getting serious symptoms of COVID-19. But many people, when we ask them, why would you get vaccinated, they've answered that I don't want my family to get sick, and I also want to contribute to herd immunity. They don't want to bring harm to somebody else. And of course, this is something that we could prove to a certain extent through our clinical tests. But it was surprising to me to see that many people in Korea answer that I don't want my actions to impact my family or my community. The third answer was I don't want myself to get sick, which is really the only thing that we are concerned with in clinical test results. When people are not willing to receive COVID-19 vaccine, the number 1 response was, I don't want to suffer any side effects from the vaccinations. But there are multiple reasons as to why people are hesitant to receive the vaccines. So there's so many reasons why people are refusing to get vaccinated. So it's very difficult to respond to all of these because they're so diverse. If we were to just force them and coerce them to get vaccinated, that can lead to other side effects. So we have to be very careful in reaching out to these people. If we look at the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, for the rich countries, they have invested astronomical sums of money in vaccine development despite all the risks. And this has led to many different vaccines in the market. And through cooperation and collaboration, we were able to shorten the vaccine development lead time. COVID-19, especially for phase 3 clinical trials, you can finish it very soon if there's a lot of people who sign up for the phase tests. But in the past, because we didn't have a lot of money, we couldn't get a lot of people to sign up to join the phase test, the phase 3 clinical test. But now, because it was such a big phenomenon in the US and in Europe, the pharma companies were able to rush through with the clinical tests, and these are now in the market. With the vaccines, you have to have all of these different ripe conditions, mRNA, virus vector, these new kinds of vaccine development technologies were there, which are all amazing, which is great. But there is also some things that did not work well. There was a supply chain issue, so a lot of the developing countries still lack access to a vaccine. And because of this COVID-19 vaccine, other vaccine pipelines were affected, and we were able to see that many people are saying, what about these other vaccines? And some people who are vaccine hesitant about the COVID-19 vaccine are now becoming distrustful of other vaccines. So they're refusing to get all medicine or vaccination. So this is another side effect. Well, what can we do for the next pandemic? We have to develop future vaccines and prove them. So prove the vaccine and then make them and then do the vaccinations, roll them out. At IVI, we believe that vaccines save lives. That's our motto. But really, vaccinations save lives. And for vaccinations, you need three things. You need the vaccine, and you need a vaccination system. You need a public health system. A public health system that has all the storage facilities that are refrigerated, a good pipeline, a good supply chain network. We all need that. You can't just have the vaccine delivered and then have the job done. You need to have the right system and the framework in place. And you also have the subjects. You need to have the people come to get the vaccines. So you need the vaccine, the system, and the vaccinee. You have to prove the worth and the value of the vaccine and raise awareness about that vaccine profile. We have a very bold mission after the pandemic. In June of 2021, the G7 countries, they launched the 100 Days mission. Last year, the Trump administration, they did a very Operation Warp Speed. I'm sure you've heard about it. It was an operation to really shortcut the time to development and lead time of the vaccine development. They want to shorten the vaccine development period down from 300 days, which it took for COVID-19, to 100 days. Many governments around the world are trying to come up with different tools and mechanisms to respond to future pandemics. And many countries are establishing new institutes and new labs to do that because they know that if they start moving when the pandemic is here, it's too late. And what is encouraging is that there are all these new platforms that could respond very quickly to new vaccines, and they've been commercialized because with the mRNA vaccine vectors, hopefully this is going to bring about new innovation for new vaccines for future pandemics. In 2014, when the Ebola virus came out, there was talk about vaccines, and the vaccine came out about 4 or 5 years later. And many countries around the world thought that, wow, Ebola has been around for a long time. Why didn't anyone make a vaccine? It's because there was no one who could fund that vaccine. So many countries, they tried to fund, and through a sort of common fund, they tried to fund the vaccine of the Ebola virus. This fund does not really think about profitability. With the viruses that have good profitability, you don't have to worry about them because the pharmaceutical companies are going to move on that anyway. So many of these common funds and the government funds have to work very quickly. Places like CEPI have to work quickly on these unprofitable vaccines. And so many of these countries and labs and institutions have received funding from CEPI to engage in development of all these different vaccines. Another thing is tech transfer. As I mentioned before, you have to go through legal review and many of these different reviews to do tech transfer because there's so many multiple technologies involved with many different stakeholders. It takes about 27 to 29 months to do tech transfer. Many companies are working very hard to develop the vaccines and research the vaccines. How can you take the time to teach this to somebody else? Which is why in the past companies would engage in tech transfer, but now for the common benefit of all, WHO is trying to do a tech hub center. So let us know a little bit of your technology and we, WHO, will promulgate that technology. You guys just worry about the development and the R&D. Let us worry about the tech transfer. So we're seeing a little bit of that change at the WHO. There's also vaccine security in Korea. Korea's vaccine self-sufficiency is about 50 to 60%, I understand, and the rest we are importing from overseas. When there's a pandemic, we have to produce vaccine, and if we can have that vaccine security, it would be easier for us to respond to a pandemic outbreak. Recently, with the K Global Vaccine Hub vision was announced by the government. I think Korea has a lot of production capacity and quality, but there is a little bit of a technology gap. So we have to bridge that technology gap so that we can produce our own vaccines and enhance that production capacity so that we can become the center of or a vaccine hub of Asia. So I think that many other countries are doing the same thing, but this is something that we have to prepare early on. You have to have the manufacturing sites and you have to build the staff and acquire the necessary talent. We also need to see harmonization of regulatory requirements. If there is a vaccine developed in your country, to sell it to another country, you need to go through the regulatory review. And also with the collaboration, we want to make it better, such as tech transfer, for example. This can be done in a much better way. There's also a push and pull strategy with vaccines. The government would give you R&D funding. This is a way of pushing you to the market. Hurry up and do the go-to market. And let's put this and quickly push it through the pipeline. When you have that push, companies would feel incentivized to do quicker in terms of the R&D because there is a definite demand in the market. So there is that. And lastly, if we continue to make vaccines for a pandemic that we don't know exactly when it might come, so somebody has to be accountable for that. In Korea, there is a joint emergency stockpile. There is a stockpile for vaccines. There's a stockpile about 100,000 doses for what emergency might come. But if we find this stockpile to be a little bit too big for us, maybe we can partner up with other countries to do joint stockpiling. I think that EU and Asia are thinking about a joint stockpile. And this is not just about vaccine, that we are seeing innovation in vaccinations. Earlier, we've heard from another speaker say that going forward, we're going to see more innovations in the next 10 years, in the last 100. We have these vaccination rollouts that are done person to person with the syringe to syringe. But if you take a look, maybe you can just do a sticker. You can just put a sticker and place that as a vaccination. The shot is much easily administered. So in the past, you did one syringe, but now with this multiple syringe kind of needle, you can do multiple vaccinations with one syringe. And in the future, maybe we can have oral vaccinations. But it's difficult to come up with oral vaccines because when you ingest it into your mouth, it could go through your digestive system and it could be a little bit thwarted. And so that digestive system issue is going to be difficult to have oral vaccines. So what I think is more possible are these patch vaccines. So the patch would have very small micro needles built into them to do the vaccination delivery. So these are some of the new innovations that we could think about. In preparing for the next pandemic, we have to engage in different efforts. The first is political will. If we go to any electoral campaign around the world, any presidential nominee, they talk about responding to the next pandemic because this has become so important after COVID-19 that many people are making political commitments. So we're seeing a lot of political will about vaccines, technological development, and early response. And the second is technology innovation. We're seeing a lot of innovation there, new vaccine platforms, vaccine delivery. This is really astronomically climbing. And next is collaboration and solidarity. Many people are emphasizing the importance of this. And the fourth is something that I think is the reason why I was invited to speak here, or why many people are tuning in to watch this lecture now, is that global desire. We all want to know more about this. We all want to know what's happening with the COVID-19 pandemic. If you've done a good job, it's not typically reported in the press, but what we see in the press are the things that we could have done better, which was why in the past with many experts have said after SARS and after MERS that, a pandemic might come, and many experts called out for that, but there was not a lot of action. But now every one of us understand that this is a very important, urgent issue. When we deal with infectious disease, I ask, how much of a commitment do you have to become the boy who cried wolf? Because you have to go out and cry wolf 100 times. So at least if nobody listens to you for the first 99 times, at least they will listen to you that last final time. So you have to be very sensitive to this and keep crying wolf. So maybe after people don't listen to you for the next 30 or so times, but maybe next time when you press the panic button, people will listen to you. Now I think that more people will be attentive to this issue. And if you press the panic button, that people will focus more, because the risks that come from not pushing the panic button so much outweigh what would happen if we ignore the panic button. We are going to see a next pandemic. Vaccine would play a very big role in that. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your informative and insightful presentation. Please give him another round of big hand. So far, we have 3 very informative and insightful presentations. And now I'd like to move on to the Q&A session with our 3 speakers. While we are arranging the stage, let me brief you on tomorrow's program. Well, the overarching theme of BIPC 2021 is what we have lost and what we must restore. Tomorrow, on day 2, we have 3 working sessions. We will start at 1:20. We will have 3 working sessions followed by Q&A. Well, the theme for each session would be global maritime container shipping trends and forecasts, disruption to shipping logistics caused by pandemic and addressing future challenges, and advantages to e-commerce and the future of ports. I'd like to ask for your full participation to join in the vision of Busan's port down the road. We will have this Q&A session, and you can ask your questions via the online platform. You can use the YouTube chat box to ask your question. Many people are joining us virtually, giving very positive feedbacks and a word of support. Once again, I'd like to thank all of you for your active participation. I think the stage is almost ready. I'd like to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Maria Castillo FERNANDEZ, Chairman Tae-woong Park, and Dr. Daniel Lee to the stage for the Q&A session. Please welcome them with a big hand. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentations. Now we will open the floor for the question. And I will give the opportunity to the on-site participants to ask questions later. The first question is to Ambassador. You have to wear the interpretation device. Thank you. So let me ask the question. You mentioned that what we need to do to brace ourselves for the post-pandemic era. However, according to Dr. Daniel Lee's presentation, a pandemic is sure to come again. So it would be quite necessary for us to prepare for the post-pandemic era and brace ourselves for another pandemic that may come again. So what kind of international solidarity and cooperation do you believe we need to have?
Yes, that is certainly a very, very good question because as Dr. Lee said, there is going to be other pandemics. What we need to work is first on enhancing health systems around the world. We haven't, this pandemic has shown that our health systems are certainly very fragile. When pandemic strikes, you know, even in European countries, we have gone really into the limit. So we need to work together to see, you know, how to strengthen in all our countries the health system to be ready in case something strikes again, and also means helping the less developed countries to support this, their infrastructure, their health systems also to be ready. Certainly work a lot on treatments. Treatments is something, you know, now we have to use treatments, not only vaccines. Put perhaps more funds on research and development to be ready so that we don't need to come and in 1 year find a vaccine for all of us. In Europe, our next big research program has one big particular area, which is health and improving living conditions. And certainly, as I said at the beginning, cooperation, and we need to continue this cooperation, make alliance of vaccines, increase our production capacities to be ready. So these are issues that are there, and I think at least we have put health as a public good on the table of our agendas, of the leaders' agendas, and that is something that, including with Korea, we are going to talk more and more in our bilateral relations.
So the support for the less developed countries and the close cooperation on the treatment. So this is the reiteration of what we are doing. Thank you very much for your answer.
We also have a question for Mr. Park. We are entering the so-called with Corona era, and we are seeing a big change impacting our society once again. And as you know, everything is now done in an uncontact or contactless kind of framework. So in this current situation, what do you think is going to be the biggest social change in the post-pandemic era, and how should we respond to this social change? Okay, so this is a very big question. In the post-pandemic era, I don't think that we can go back to how things were in the past. In fact, I think it will be impossible for us to do that. And as Her Excellency, the ambassador, talked about climate change and environmental change and the pandemic, that these are the two single biggest challenges that we have to confront. But I think that the climate change crisis and the pandemic crisis come from the same root, because most of the pandemics come from these diseases that are shared between human and animals, zoonotic diseases they are called, because humans are expanding our territory into those areas where animals live. And so all of these diseases that primarily lived on animals are jumping to human carriers. And so this kind of our growth philosophy and our growth mindset have to be changed, because right now all the world is really focusing on growth. Even communist countries are saying that they have to grow. Even North Korea is saying that we have to grow and develop. So this growth mindset is the single biggest mindset for us, but I think that this growth mindset has lost its way and it has lost its philosophy, because we keep growing, but we don't know why we have to keep growing. So if we look at the pandemic crisis and the climate crisis, I think that they ultimately share the same problem, the same root. So unless we change around our philosophy, then we cannot go back to the past. So we would, we're wearing our face masks and, keeping this kind of distance with one another. We're afraid to get very close to one another, so we would want to keep this distance between us. But we still have to be together because, we have to work together. And I think that this is going to be the new normal going forward. And I think that there will be shorter and shorter cycles of the pandemic in the future. However, despite that, we have to find a way to survive somehow. So I think that this was a time for all of humanity to really look back and reflect on our past actions, primarily on the growth mindset. And the pandemic has taught us that if we don't all get better together, then none of us will be free from the impact. So, the advanced countries, they can roll out vaccinations, but if the developing countries are not vaccinated, then we'll see all these mutants and variants. In fact, the soil would be more rich for more of these mutant variants. Alpha, beta, now we're seeing the Delta variant. We're going to see more of these variants, and that's going to impact all of us if we are not all vaccinated together. So I think that this is a common challenge for all of humanity, and it's a way for us to ask ourselves, why are we so focused on growth and development over everything else? Because if we cannot coexist together, then none of us will exist or survive. I hope that this was a time for us to learn this lesson. But anyway, I don't think that we can go to a time pre-pandemic. So thank you. In the with Corona era, we have to work with one another or none of us will survive. So this is a common challenge that we are facing. We have to overcome this challenge together. Thank you.
The last question is to Dr. Lee, and then we will open the floor for the questions for the on-site participants. Thank you very much for your presentation. To my understanding, at IVI, bacteria-based vaccines such as cholera and typhoid have been developed and supplied directly to Africa. However, as for it is not a developed country, but a virus-based thing such as MERS and the COVID-19, which drove the entire world into a pandemic situation. Please let us know if there is a response strategy or a manual for vaccine development that IVI has for a virus that mutates and spreads quickly. And if there is any development or distribution project in progress, please let us know. Well, the approach for the manufacturing and development for bacteria-based vaccine and virus-based vaccine are different. The IVI's initial focus was on the diarrhea, a bacteria-based vaccine, because that is mainly for the developing countries. And I don't think any of you have been vaccinated for cholera or typhoid. If you are a Korean resident, but we do not have cholera or typhoid outbreak in Korea. So Korea and any other developed countries would not develop this type of vaccine anymore, and that is why IVI, this kind of international organization, has developed this vaccine. So in this case, we outsourced to an outside research lab, setting a condition that, in this case, you have to supply this less than $1 per dose. And as for COVID-19 vaccine, well, this will be a very commercially viable. That is why there would be many other pharmaceutical companies who would develop a COVID-19 vaccine. That is why IVI did not do that. There are quite a number of COVID vaccine out there in the market, but we have to go further, and we do not know yet which is the best available platform for the COVID vaccine. So the research needs to continue, and we need to continue to develop COVID vaccine. And once they can be properly and sufficiently manufactured and supplied, then even developing countries can have any meaningful level of vaccination. So as for the vaccination and the vaccine development, there is no set manual. And those who are like-minded need to get together to research and develop a vaccine. And the foundation of the unsparing support and sponsorship of nations around the world. Well, in the past, the government and international organizations would be quite reluctant to provide support for unverified or rather risky vaccine development, but now they are more than willing to. I believe the vaccine development and the response should be in line with the behavior and the type of diseases. And that's how it has been done. So I would say there is no one set manual for vaccine development. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask for your continued effort in this regard to ensure the health of the people around the world. I'd like to know whether there is anyone who has a question among the participants here in this venue.
Yes, I see a hand. Please stand up, and we will hand a microphone to you. We are not getting the microphone feed. This is a question to Mr. Park. I remember you mentioned in your presentation that long ago you would tag along the U.S. soldiers' jeeps and ask for chocolates and etc. I remember doing that as well as a kid. You seem much younger than me, so that was surprising to hear. You said that we can. You said that we are in the G7 countries now, and yes, we have come a long way. There's a lot of divisive elements in Korean society, though. In Korea, we see a lot of divisions in Korean society. I don't want to talk about just ideological factions or political party divides, but I do look at the young generation today in Korea, and I think that there are a lot of divides. But listening to your presentation, I was wondering, what can we do to bridge all of these different divides in our society? What can politicians or the existing older generation do, especially for the young generation, because they're suffering through all of these divides in our society? Okay, so this is another very big question. I don't know why I'm getting all the hard questions. So I may look young, but I am quite old. I would like to make that very clear. When I was young, I grew up on C Nation. It's a kind of drink, or like C rations. It's a kind of rations from the U.S. Army. So that's how old I am. But in any case, I think that we in Korean society, we have to learn about a good way to engage in discussion. When we see numbers and statistics, we have to really understand the context and understand the meaning behind the words and the numbers. So I'm trying to say that we shouldn't always try to seek a solution. We have to make it a custom, a norm, to look at what the problem is. Let's come to a clear analysis and definition of the problem. Let's understand the question. Let's say outside of this conference venue, there's a restaurant. And I say that, man, I tried the restaurant. It's very bad. And all of my colleagues say that, yeah, that restaurant was very bad. Yeah, I didn't like that restaurant. Would you consider that a consensus on the problem? So you ask the first person, why didn't you like that restaurant? And that first person would say, oh, the food tasted bad. You ask the second person, why didn't you like that restaurant? Oh, the food was great, but it's so expensive. You ask the third person, why didn't you like that restaurant? Oh, it's really good. The food is good. The prices are okay, but it's very dirty. You ask the fourth person, oh, the food is good. The prices are reasonable. The place is clean, but the employees are so rude. So you would have different ideas. We all of us came to the belief that the restaurant is not good, but there was no actual consensus among us because we fail to accurately define and diagnose the problem. We don't know what the problem is. So this is a kind of fake conclusion. But in Korea, because we saw such rapid, accelerated growth, and we became an advanced nation too quickly. We only ask how. We don't ask what or why. So when something happens, what we do is, oh, what do we do? How should we fix this? We don't ask, why did this problem happen? What is the cause behind this problem? We just say, hurry up, let's get rid of the problem. Hurry up, let's fix the problem. So we always ask, how? How do we fix it? How should we go about it? That's the only question we ask. So I really want to urge, instead of looking for the solution, let's try to agree on what the problem is. So right now you say that there is this division between the political parties, for example, with the Democrats and the Republicans. If you really look into that, they're not fighting over a particular problem. They're not looking at some of the problems that are confronting Korean society. They're not talking about the causes behind the problem. They're fighting over what they're going to do to fix the problem. They are shooting at these non-existent targets. They're shooting at ghosts in the air because they haven't clearly defined the problem. So I think that before we have to search for a solution, we have to have a common agreement on what the problem is. And when this becomes the norm, that can really allow us to grow. We have to make that a kind of common practice. We have to continue to practice this and make that a custom and make that a new norm so that we can negotiate and compromise our way to finding a solution.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wants to ask a burning question here? So would you please stand up so that our staff can hand over a microphone? Would you please stand up once again to identify where you are? Please hand over a microphone to the person. I'm Tae-woong from BPA. My question is to the ambassador. From 2005 to 2008, you worked in Korea, so you are getting back to Korea 12 years later. I'd like to know what brought you back to Korea and how things have changed over the 12-year period personally, do you think?
Well, I didn't spend only 3 years in Korea. I spent 8 years working on Korean Peninsula, 3 years living in Seoul, and 5 years also from Brussels. So I came very often to Korea, to the two Koreas, North and South. So my career started here. My first posting was Korea, and my children were here with me. So it's part of my life, and I started my tour of Asia from here to Hong Kong, from Hong Kong back to Brussels, but dealing with South Asia, and then to ASEAN through Malaysia. And then when the post was open, you know, everyone was looking at me and saying, "Maria, are you coming back?" so it was more natural to end up, this will be certainly my last posting, to end up here. For me, it's very gratifying. It's more easy because I think I know a bit more the country. I know how the Koreans, now I've learned even more with Dr. Park because he has really explained a lot of things, the new wave. At that time, climate issues were not at all in the agenda. I remember very well. Certainly, cities have become much more greener, much more clean, and most of all, people have become more open. And I think that's a bit of the creativity that you are looking for, that Korea has really in these 12 years, 13 years that I haven't been here, changed very quickly into a first-class society and has opened up more. You reach out to the international, to the global. You want to be there. That's why you're now in part of the the 10th biggest economies, and certainly we want to see a Korea that is certainly comes with us and shares responsibility. So that is certainly very good. That's what I find certainly much more creativity, much more openness in this society. There are still issues, including issues like women's rights, which I think economy has gone very quickly, and society has not been able to follow in a way. I think that's the main issue here that I find. So still the patterns of society are still very close. So slowly I hope that we'll be able to open, and certainly I would like to contribute a little bit on to that. So I'm very happy to be back. And you know, to try to bring my experience throughout my tour and my life tour and professional tour in Asia back to Korea, to bring Korea much more open to Europe and build that bridge as a diplomat, which is certainly our job here. Thank you.
네, 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much for that response. Are there any more questions from the floor? Please raise your hand and let us know. If you can stand up, we can make sure to hand over the microphone to you. Hello. My name is Kim Jae-hee. I work at BPA. I have a question to Dr. Lee. My oldest is 13 years old, and the school has sent us a letter asking us to vaccinate our children. I know that in the US, they are vaccinating kids as young as 12 years old and even as young as 5 years old. But I heard that the infection rates among children are not that high. So when there's still research and development in process, is it really okay for us to vaccinate our children who are young, as preteens and even younger than that? And with climate crisis, we're going to see more viruses. But with the coronavirus, as you mentioned in your presentation, when there is no vaccine in place and when there's these viruses that come about, you said that you were able to see this accelerated process through phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. But if we see more of these viruses in the future, should we have to go through all of these vaccines, individual vaccines for all the individual viruses? I was really hoping I would not be asked this question. But I have to say a lot of parents ask me the same question. Should I vaccinate my kids? And as I mentioned before, for adults and senior citizens, we have very good proof. But with young kids, as you mentioned before, the proof is not as high. And you said that the infection rates among young children are quite low. That's true. And so we don't see as many severe patients with young population. However, governments around the world are making sure they're giving recommendations to vaccinate young kids because there are still child mortalities. And secondly, the vaccinations are not necessarily to prevent disease. We want the vaccinations to be rolled out so that children can go to the schools because especially for the younger schools, it's very difficult for them to continue to do remote schooling, and vaccinations can allow the kids to go back to school. And also, thirdly, maybe the viruses have not been attacking young kids because it was attacking older people first. So this means that if the older people are vaccinated, if they're fully vaccinated, the viruses might seek out young kids. They might start attacking young kids even more virulently. And then if we decide to vaccinate young kids, then it might be too late. So even with the current proof that we have, looking at the current group as a whole, we feel that the risks of not vaccinating the kids would be greater than if we were to vaccinate them. So, yes, I know that this is a very difficult situation, especially for parents. But for these countries that have seen more vaccinations for young kids, we're seeing that the vaccination rates have been going up for young kids. And the public health statement is done at a group level. So I know that the parents are very concerned, especially because you worry about your own kids, your own individual kids. So perhaps maybe I can say you should talk to your family doctor and see if your kids, have different profiles. We need to look at the risk profile assessment of the individual kids. So just listening to your question, I cannot just tell you that yes, you should get vaccinated or no, you shouldn't get vaccinated. But on average, if we look at the proof around the world, it appears to show that the benefits of vaccinations are greater than the risks. Hopefully in the next pandemic, you said that if there is a next pandemic, do we have to get another vaccine shot? Right now with the COVID-19, there are still some things that people are looking into, researchers are looking into when the 2 shots are not enough. We're talking about booster shots and etc. In the next pandemic, if there's a new vaccine that is developed, then yes, I would say that you might have to get the next vaccine shot because the next pandemic might be different from this pandemic. Oh, in some cases, maybe even if it's a similar profile vaccine, you can get a booster shot. And if it's been about 10 years or 20 years or so, for the same disease, you can get a booster shot or an additional follow-up shot for that disease. So in the next pandemic, if there is a vaccine that has been developed and it's safe and very effective, then I would say that there is no reason for you to not get the shot.
Thank you very much. We have 3 very insightful and inspiring lectures. I've learned a lot. Please give our 3 speakers another round of big applause. Thank you very much. The 9th Busan International Port Conference 2021, what we have lost and what we must restore, will continue with day 2. We will start at 1:20 in the afternoon for tomorrow's program. We will take a look at global maritime container shipping trends and forecast a disruption to shipping logistics caused by pandemic and rising future challenges and advantages to e-commerce and the future of ports. I'd like to ask for your full participation in tomorrow's session. This concludes today's program. Thank you very much once again for your participation. Thank you.